Hey there, and welcome to the Confident Woman Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Brooks. Join me as I sit down and chat with co-hosts, friends, and carefully curated guests and talk about all the things that empower you to become your best and most confident self. So, let's get started. I've been thinking about another part of becoming that I don't think we talk enough about, and it's this identity crisis when you realize you are no longer fully who you were, but you also do not completely know yet who you're becoming. This strange in between where your old patterns, your old ways, everything you knew formerly is starting to lose its grip. But what you recognize now is that these new rhythms, these new patterns, these new ways of being, they still feel unfamiliar. And even though you know something within you has changed, you cannot pinpoint what exactly your life is supposed to look like now. And that is the challenge. That is the tension. That is the in between. That is the messy middle. And so here's what makes it so complicated, because from the outside, staying in that familiar version of yourself, it can look like everything is going right. It can look like you're fulfilling your duties, you're looking responsible, you're carrying out what you've always done, you're showing up with integrity, you're walking the walk, talking the talk, doing all the things that you always had been doing. It can look like you're staying true to yourself. You're being consistent in everything that you've ever done before. When there's this tension between protecting what you have already built and honoring your commitments, it's this little feeling inside of you that says, but I don't want to disappoint anyone. I don't want to disappoint the people I love, because if I change too much, then what if they reject me? If I change, what if they don't accept me? If I change, what does that mean for me? And so that little inkling that tells you, don't go too far, don't shine too bright, don't change too much, that's just your fear talking. On the outside, it can look like you are strong, you're loyal, you're committed, you're disciplined, but there is still that quiet whisper of fear. It's the fear of not knowing who you are without that old identity. And that fear of disappointing the people you love and the people you show up for, those are the only ones that know how to relate to this old version of you. And that fear is going to continue to stop you if we don't nip it in the bud. That's the whole thing that will help you move forward, is by facing those fears or overcoming those fears. The whole thing will fall apart, is what fear will tell you. There may also be this fear that if you finally admit that you have changed, you will have to make decisions you have been avoiding. Because once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. It becomes so much harder to keep pretending you didn't see it. And that is why staying stuck can feel easier than becoming, because the familiar version of you has that track record. She knows how to do the thing, how to be needed, how to perform, how to push, how to please, how to perfect, how to make herself absolutely useful and purposeful and just be of service and love on others and do all the things. But at the same time, she learned how to survive the demands that were placed on her. She may have been exhausted, but it was familiar. When everything within you feels unsteady and feels like it's going to collapse, and you are just looking for something to put your feet on solid ground, that is the point of where you're ready to let go. Because becoming, it requires honesty before it gives you the actual clarity. And most of us want the clarity first. We want to know what the plan is, where we're going, what we're doing, how to prepare ourselves. But that's the thing. We don't have the perfect plan, but the world will sell you a perfect plan. The world will tell you to hustle and grind and strive and be and do and chase. And they sell you this framework. If you just do the thing, you can have the thing, and then you can be whatever you want to be. But we have that script so backwards that we have to flip the narrative and flip the script, that it becomes about be, do, and have. Because I found myself in these seasons and countless times that I was actively chasing the verb. I was the doer. I was the pleaser. I was chasing, striving, pleasing, performing, perfecting, hustling, grinding. Basically, I was surviving because I didn't know yet who I was to be in this season. And so I thought that if I took over the action, at least I was moving forward. But then I forgot about who I was being in the process of it all. So now, when we find ourselves veering off track, this is not to place any guilt or shame on ourselves, but to correct it before we get too far off track, too far off the path that we have been assigned to walk along. What I found is that the more I can recognize this, I can come back to, who am I being in this season? Who am I being in this moment? What am I actually feeling internally that feels disconnected? And now maybe the action needs to align because the identity doesn't align with the action, right? So what if we could flip that script, instead of externally and outwardly chasing or doing something to get the results we want? What if we could become the result we want and start taking cautious and oriented steps to move forward to the outcome of what we actually want and desire? I get it. Because while you're in this pain of suck and it just sucks, right? We don't want to hang out there and unpack our bags and vacation for a while. We want to look for quick fixes. I get it. Nobody wants to sit in pain forever. And if we're out there looking, searching, and scanning for the next best solution, a way to get out of our pain, the way to get out of this suck, the way to get out of this season, because it feels so unfamiliar, the uncertainty, the not knowing if your feet will ever touch on solid ground. You feel like you're floating and scrambling and you don't even know where you belong yet, because this is that middle. It's the growing season. It's the growing pains. But I want to caution you that before we start searching externally, we forget who is the solution, right? It's like the scripture where they're in the boat and Jesus is walking on the water and we calm in the storm, right? And he says, the minute that they try to walk on the water and he takes his eyes off of Christ, he sinks into the water. And Christ says, but you have little faith. Where is our faith right now? Are we putting it into the external? Are we putting it into someone else's framework, somebody else's blueprint? Or are we putting our trust back into the one that holds our future and our purpose and our identity? That's something I'm going through in real life, real time. It is hard because we're living in this world filled with noise and distraction. Well, we don't know where to go or what to do. And sometimes when God is feeling silent, you're like, okay, I think this is the next step. Or if he's not answering me, I can't just sit here and do nothing. So I got to do something. This is where this dichotomy and this wrestle internally that we experience in these seasons. I'm sharing that because that's the real deal of what I'm personally going through. And I know that I'm not alone. That's interesting, is that when we could see ourselves acting and behaving this way, we know where we need to go back to, right? It's about aligning ourselves with who he has called, equipped, and created us to be. When we look at this, it's pretty cool because you could follow the patterns, you could follow the breadcrumbs, you could follow back where it all started. We can't follow the breadcrumbs of where it's going because we don't know yet. So that's where the trust thing is, right? When we're in the season of becoming, we'd show up differently because we are different. We're making these spaces and figuring out life and trying to figure out who and what we're here to do, right? We don't have the questions answered. And so that's the uncomfortable part of when our identity has been attached to our ability to create or produce or lead or help or build or make something useful out of everything that we've experienced. And that's when we have found ourselves trying to make sense of life when we don't have sense of it at all. It can feel wrong letting us remain in that thought because we know that the story, it's personal. And maybe the season, it's unfinished, but without it, we immediately start to ask, what does this mean for our work? What does this mean for our responsibilities? What does this mean for the people who rely on us? Or what are we supposed to do with it all? These are valid questions. These are valid concerns. These are valid things that we do think about because we have responsibilities. We have obligations. We have family. We got lives. We have coworkers. We got friends. We got careers. We got vocation, right? For me, I was questioning, how do I get back to myself? But I think there's a better question. Part of myself am I trying to get back to, and does she actually belong in this next season? Because there are parts of yourself that you want to reclaim. You work so hard on it, you love these pieces about you. And there are many parts of you that existed before this pressure, before the expectations and the responsibilities, before grief, before loss, before survival, before all of the ways that you learned to measure your worth through what you could produce, carry, create, achieve. Maybe it's this woman who felt so deeply, who trusted herself so much, who made room for the joy, who moved her body because it felt incredible and it helped her feel so alive. And it was who created because she loved creating. Or the woman who believed in possibility before everything became something she had to prove. Maybe those parts feel like you. They feel like home. They feel like the version that you have loved and missed and want to bring into this new season. They may have been the pieces that connected you to who you have always been underneath everything that life required you to become. And reclaiming them may not mean moving backward at all. It may mean returning to something true that wasn't buried, but it was never completely lost. And so there may also be parts of yourself that you do not need or want to resurrect. The version of you that thought you had to rest because you earned it, who was confused by being needed versus being loved, the woman who measured her value by what she produced, who tried to hold everything together and who kept making herself more useful, more capable, more productive, while becoming more disconnected from herself and costing herself her own integrity, her own trust, and her own belief in her own identity. All these small little fractures, they all have a price to pay. And that's the cost of staying the same without recognizing what you're learning and building and growing from. And so those different versions of you, they look like everything else on the outside. And I don't doubt that, right? But they survived a season for a reason. They protected and carried you through everything that you needed to know and experience in your life. But that doesn't automatically mean that she is now at the same capacity or has the same bandwidth or the freedom or support to lead you into what comes next. And I think a lot of us women know exactly what that feels like. You can look the part. You can look successful, strong, disciplined, faithful, all put together. Because success has this external vision of what it looks like. It's this well put together woman, Proverbs 31. But we don't talk about the struggles behind all that. And this, we all struggle because we're all human. And so whether you even know how to find your way back to that version of her, that's not up for you to decide. It doesn't mean that you're falling apart or that you've lost your way, but it means that you're outgrowing something that was never supposed to be permanent. And that includes this version of yourself that helped you survive this season, but it was never meant to become your permanent identity. And that's a problem that I think is important to reiterate, is that the past is the past. The past can begin to look like safety and security, but it's not your present. Your present right now is tender. It's raw. It's been beaten, battered, and bruised because it has been shaped. It's shaping, right? Think of it like the potter and the clay. It was just a clump of clay, but it has to be molded and shaped and shifted to become this beautiful pot or vase, whatever the potter decides to make. And that potter is your creator. So he's shaping and shifting and molding you. He's transforming you within. When you said that you want to go back to yourself, it may be worth going down this long path to ask yourself, what are you actually reaching for? What is the thing that you long for? What is holding you in that path? Are you reaching for yourselves that were once rooted in faith, freedom, creativity, truth, joy, alignment? Or do you find yourself reaching for a version of you fueled by pressure, fear, exhaustion, and the need to prove that she can handle it all? Are you fueled by the fact that you think you have control? Is that what you're asking for? Because when we start reaching for something, it's by our own design that we want certainty, control in a life that feels like it's spiraling and out of control. Some of what we've built is worth reclaiming and want it, but you have to recognize that not everything is meant for you in this new season. So we got to let this stuff go. We just have to trust. This is where becoming becomes less about control and declaration for your entire future and more about allowing this woman that you are to become the one that is capable of living out what God has called and equipped and created you to be. That decision may be connected to rest, work, relationships, boundaries. When we look at our lives, we have to take inventory and accountability. How are we showing up in those areas? How are we showing up in our work, in our relationships? Are we setting boundaries and adhering to them? How are we moving our body? How are we tapping into our creativity, our joy? How are we leading and living and loving with faith at the center of it? Or are we trying to redefine what success looks like? It doesn't have to look so impressive like this world will sell you and tell you, when success is subjective and personal to you. Maybe that's the redefining of what is success for you in this season. And so that is why I created the Becoming Identity Planner and Journal, because I needed somewhere to do this honest, real, raw, messy work. And I knew other women needed it too. And so I created it in the middle of my own becoming while I was still working out who I was underneath it all. Everything that I carried, everything that I built, everything I lost, everything that I survived. And it became the place where all of those questions could live on paper long enough for the truth to come out. And so the planner begins by helping you name the season that you're actually in, taking a long, hard, honest look at what you're still carrying, and seeing the spaces between where you are and where you feel God is calling you across your identity, your faith, your calling, your work, your body, your relationships, joy, and money. It gives you 12 months to keep returning to the woman you said you were becoming, one honest page and one real decision at a time. Without creating space for honesty, it's easy to go back to old behaviors, old patterns. In this new season, we get to build new goals around old patterns and wonder why the life you are creating still does not feel like yours, but you reclaim that. You keep changing what you're doing without looking at who is making the decisions, what she is still carrying, and whether that version of her leading this next chapter has completed her purpose. And so if this episode made you realize that you do not need to go back to every version of yourself and you're ready to see more clearly what you are releasing, reclaiming, and becoming, the Becoming Identity Planner and Journal is available in the show notes below. Click the link. And if you're still unsure which season you are in or where to begin, I have a link for a free Becoming quiz also in the show notes below. And so as Philippians 3:13 and 14 says, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal. I don't read that as permission to dismiss everything behind you or pretend it didn't shape you. These are pieces that we shed and let go of. But I hear it as permission to keep moving forward without continuing to obey the identities, the patterns, and expectations that you have outgrown. You do not have to know exactly who you are becoming before releasing who you're no longer willing to be. You can stay both honest and present long enough to notice what God is restoring within you, what He is asking you to release, and what parts of you are being given the room to breathe and live again. So again, the question may not be, how do I get back to myself? But rather the question may be, what part of myself is God bringing back to life, and what part of me has already completed its purpose? So that is some food for thought. And I encourage you to check out both the Becoming Identity Planner and Journal and get started, take inventory, take agency over your life. And if you're not sure where to begin, click the link in the show notes to take the Becoming quiz, and will help identify and point you in the right next steps. So until next week, take care and God bless.
Hey there. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Confident Woman Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Thanks again for listening.